This is a KRQE News Special, Albuquerque Police DWI Dismissal Scandal.
I was outraged. I mean, we should all be outraged.
This is horrible. It was a violation of trust for victims, a violation of trust for every officer who's out there doing the right thing.
Probably, could be one of the biggest corruption cases that APD has ever experienced, that the city has ever experienced.
For decades, people across New Mexico have suffered the horrific consequences of drunk driving.
The lives lost, families devastated, and the lifelong pain that comes with losing a loved one. Over the years, the state has spent millions battling the scourge with checkpoints, steeper penalties, and dedicated DWI units inside police departments. But now, a bombshell revelation. Welcome to this KRQE News 13 special, the Albuquerque Police DWI scandal. Over the next hour, we will look at how the investigation began and tell you where it stands now.
It started in January of this year. News 13 learned the FBI was investigating Albuquerque police officers for a scheme that appears to involve officers taking money to get DWI cases dismissed.
The allegations are outrageous, and it was clear from the start this could be the biggest police corruption case in Albuquerque's history. FBI raids, sudden resignations, and hundreds of drunk driving suspects off the hook. A rough start to 2024 for the Albuquerque Police Department. The department suddenly grappling with a scandal that could stretch back more than a decade and reach well beyond the walls of APD. This Northeast Albuquerque home, one of a handful of places the feds raided in January, serves as an office for a prominent defense attorney. He could be the key to unlocking the massive scheme involving allegations that Albuquerque police officers were getting paid to make DWI charges disappear. The day of the raids, which included at least one officer's home, we also learned the Bernalillo County District Attorney had dismissed dozens of open DWI cases because the officers involved were no longer trustworthy.
The idea of dismissing approximately 150 DWI cases is a gut punch to me. It makes me sick to my stomach.
Today, that number has grown to more than 200 cases.
In the wake of the shocking announcement and the damage done to current cases that involved implicated officers, Albuquerque's police chief raced to limit the damage to his department's reputation. He sat down with KRQE investigative reporter Ann Perrette.
This is horrible. It was a violation of trust for victims, a violation of trust for every officer who's out there doing the right thing, and we got to make sure we get this right.
Albuquerque's police chief says he's heard from a number of victims and understands their concerns.
I am not okay with these individuals being let off of their charges, but it is the right thing to do. Given the fact that these officers are accused of something that is just despicable.
Chief Harold Medina says he's been working with the FBI since October 2023, investigating allegations against officers in APD's DWI unit. That's shortly after he found out the feds were actually already looking into similar complaints of misconduct. The chief can't get that specific with the feds in charge.
This is a very complex investigation, which is going to involve a lot of parts, a lot of different moving parts within the criminal justice system. So we're being very cautious how we move forward, and I have to respect my partners in this.
One of the officers implicated in the scheme started in the DWI unit in 2011, meaning this alleged misconduct may go back 13 years. So how did the chief and administrations before him miss this? The chief says he's also asking himself that question.
But I think we got to remember that they got away with it if it was occurring. It's something that's occurred for over a decade. So obviously they were very good at hiding this. And we are glad that this administration has been able to bring this to light.
Chief Medina points out he views this investigation as proof the current administration is committed to reform.
It's horrible. So yes, in a way there is a stain on APD, but I think that there is the general public who's going to realize that leadership is holding individuals accountable. We're not sweeping anything under the carpet, and we're making sure that we fully investigate everything to the best of our ability.
Ann Perrette, KRQE investigates.
While the chief suggested leadership was in the dark about the scheme for all of those years, a letter from one of the officers tells a very different story.
Joshua Montano was the latest officer to resign after the department put him on leave, but he is the first we know of to admit his own involvement. His resignation letter paints a damning portrait of what he and others in the department were up to and how much the higher-ups knew.
Her eyes appear to be bloodshot and watery to me.
That's then Officer Joshua Montano testifying in 2018 in one of his DWI cases that did go to trial. Now Montano claims he's being made a scapegoat for the city's failures. This, according to a letter he sent to the superintendent of police reform the day of his resignation. In that letter, Montano says he takes responsibility for his actions, but that, quote, the issues I let myself get caught up in within the DWI unit were generational. And while the chief has characterized the scheme as a small circle of wrongdoers.
And you know what? It's unfortunate. This is a very small percentage of the department.
In his letter, Montano calls that notion far from the truth, suggesting more people should have been placed on leave. In fact, Montano claims APD leadership knew about the misconduct within the unit and, quote, none of the allegations against myself or others in the DWI unit happened without supervisory knowledge, though the letter stops short of specifics about what those actions were and who else was involved.
So far, no one has been criminally charged in the scheme, but the officers implicated include Montano, Harvey Johnson, Honorio Alba, and Nelson Ortiz, as well as Lieutenant Justin Hunt. All five were initially placed on leave and have since resigned, all shortly before they would have been required to sit down for interviews with Internal Affairs. A sixth is still on leave, Internal Affairs Commander Mark Landavaso, while another member of the IA department has been reassigned. So what are those officers accused of doing exactly?
The feds have stayed tight-lipped about their investigation, but News 13 has pieced together clues to how that scheme worked through public records, witness accounts, lapel videos, and audio recordings.
Next, we'll share what we found, shedding light on how all of these DWI cases seem to vanish into thin air.
It became clear early on the scheme had something to do with letting suspected drunk drivers off the hook. But how exactly?
From what we've pieced together, it appears many cases were dropped, but other cases may never have been filed in the first place. One clue comes in the form of a letter describing a driver's experience in August of 2023 when he got pulled over on suspicion of driving drunk. That driver reported the incident to the Bernalillo County District Court, where he once worked, and the court notified the police oversight agency. The court clerk raises questions over, quote, questionable conduct by the arresting officer, who the citation shows was Honorio Alba, one of the officers who resigned in the midst of this scandal. The letter says the officer put the driver in contact with an attorney who would ensure that no court case would be filed by APD. That DWI charge would later be dropped, one of the hundreds of cases the district attorney dismissed after these allegations came to light. A major irregularity in that case was that even though he was suspected of driving drunk, the driver was not arrested at the scene.
And that's part of a pattern, as KRQE investigates uncovered. Ann Perrette explains.
In February, I spoke with a DWI defense attorney whose client had a similar experience with that same officer. The attorney pointed out one red flag after another in the body camera video from the night her client got arrested.
The reason I pulled you over, that you went a bit fast. I had you run 46 and 25, so I'm 21 over.
That's Albuquerque police officer Honorio Alba pulling someone over last July for speeding. He tells the driver he ran her license plate and saw her insurance is expired too. While she tries to pull up a copy of it on her phone, he asks if she's been drinking. She says no, but according to the criminal complaint, he believed her eyes were bloodshot and she smelled of alcohol. So he asks the woman to get out of the car.
So whenever you're ready, You can begin this test.
After multiple field sobriety tests and the woman complaining of the wind,
You didn't do all these tests.
she's arrested for drunk driving.
We disagree. We didn't believe that there was probable cause to support his decision to arrest.
An expected argument from a criminal defense attorney. M. Naomi Salazar's represented people charged with a DWI in the Albuquerque area for 30 years. She tells me not much surprises her, except what happened in this case after that arrest.
Go walk straight to your left. You have a seat on the metal bench.
When Officer Alba and Salazar's client arrived to the Prisoner Transport Center, or PTC, downtown, he takes off his lapel camera.
And it's supposed to be worn on the uniform so that it can pick up in a close proximity whatever the officer is observing.
Attorney Salazar says he's violating one of APD's standard operating procedures, and she should be able to hear every interaction the officer has with her client. But that's not all. Despite her client refusing a breathalyzer test, which elevates the charge against her to an aggravated DWI, Officer Alba told the woman to phone a friend to come pick her up. He tells her the Prisoner Transport Center, which they're currently inside, is closed, so she won't be transferred to the jail that night. She'll get a criminal summons in the mail instead.
When I've never had a DWI client be released the way she was.
Another standard operating procedure violation, Attorney Salazar says, and then she points out how Officer Alba let her client go.
She walks out the door and then he turns around and goes back into the building. We don't see where she got in the vehicle, what's going on. He had custody of her. He has an obligation to make sure that she's safe. And I feel that that obligation was breached.
Attorney Salazar filed motions to dismiss the case, citing both violations. And just days later, it was, but not because of her motions. Instead, it was because Honorio Alba was among the officers added to the Bernalillo County District Attorney's list of officers who are considered not credible.
I was pleased and I was happy for my client, but I was still surprised by it. I didn't think it went beyond this case. I just thought it was some error, what I believe were errors in the way this case transpired. I didn't think that there was a big picture or it went any further.
Albuquerque police confirms if the Prisoner Transport Center was closed, Officer Alba wouldn't have been able to walk inside the building, and he would have been expected to drive the woman to the Metro Detention Center to be booked for the DWI.
We sifted through a number of Alba's cases, also now dismissed, and found others following the same pattern. Alba saying the transport center was closed and releasing the person he had detained, then filing a summons days or weeks later.
KRQE Investigates uncovered an even more revealing DWI case showing how the scheme might have worked. Gabrielle Burkhardt shows us the massive irregularities in how one of the other implicated officers handled a DWI arrest.
This case is the clearest example we've seen yet of an APD cop making a questionable arrest, then steering the accused drunk driver toward a lawyer's office, also implicated in the scandal.
It's shocking and quite frankly disgusting.
You need to get off of this.
I do.
Okay. You're at the right place.
It was the most traumatic experience I've ever had in my entire life.
Carlos Smith's nightmare goes back to June 25th last summer.
I'm Officer Montano with APS. Stopped you for speeding.
Yes, sir.
Police lapel video shows the 42-year-old stopped by Albuquerque Police DWI officer Joshua Montano near I-25 in Central.
Carlos, why are you going so fast, man?
I apologize. I was just trying to get over in the lane. My bad.
Okay. Where are you coming from?
Downtown? Pizza place.
Okay. Any alcohol tonight?
No, sir.
No? Can I look at your eyes real quick?
Yeah.
Officer Montano checks his eyes.
Can you step out real quick?
As the officer explains more field sobriety tests, Smith admits,
I'm nervous,
saying he's concerned about his 16-year-old cousin who's watching from the car.
Just trying to relax. My cousin.
Oh. All right.
That'd be a good example. I shouldn't have sped. I'm sorry, sir.
Well, let's just see how you do, okay?
He does an eye test.
One.
Walks in a straight line, and for this one mentions knee problems.
This is the bad knee, so can I do this leg instead?
Any leg you like.
Okay. 1, 2002, 2003.
Smith then counts backward.
47, 46, 45, 43.
And successfully recites a portion of the alphabet.
F, G, H, I, J, K,
LMNOPQR.
But in the end,
I do have to give you the opportunity to do a breath.
Okay.
I do have to place you in handcuffs and I do have to place you under arrest.
Seriously, sir?
Caller, still be there, turn around.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
To be truthfully honest, I was lost and super confused. I didn't know what to do, so I had no choice but to proceed and do what he asked.
leaving his cousin to wait for a ride.
She's totally fine.
Smith is taken to the prisoner transport center downtown and willingly takes 2 breathalyzer tests. Montano takes off his lapel camera, so it's hard to hear this interaction.
But I took off your iWatch.
But you can see Officer Montano taking off Smith's Apple Watch and bracelet, something Smith's attorney says raises red flags.
The fact that he took off his lapel camera to interact with Carlos while he was effectuating the arrest was improper, violates standard operating procedures, and again goes to show the officer's intent to extort Mr. Smith.
After blowing below the legal limit of .08 twice, Smith was still arrested and booked into jail for DWI.
It started to make more sense and put the clues together when he decided to leave me a voicemail.
Hey Carlos, this is Officer Montano with APD. I was just giving you a call because I don't know if you realize, but I'm sure you do that. Some of your jewelry was missing from your property from Sunday evening, and it looks like the PTC officers didn't put that in your property bag, but I have it.
In a follow-up phone call, Smith says Officer Montano told him he could get his bracelet back from his attorney friend.
Where did you go?
And it was one of the houses that was raided and was on television. When I saw it, I was like, wow, I was at that house.
Smith says he was sent here, defense attorney Thomas Clear's office, one of the places raided by federal agents in January.
This scheme perpetuates a narrative that outcomes can be bought and sold. It undermines our entire justice system.
The proof, he says, is in Smith's recorded interaction with Clear's paralegal Rick Mendez the day he retrieved his bracelet.
I knew from that moment I needed to document everything, and I did.
How are you, sir? Yes, I am, sir.
Smith says Mendez handed him the bracelet.
What is my next best step to try and not get this on my record? What do you recommend I do?
If you need to get off of this,
I do.
Okay, you're at the right place. If
Okay.
you're one of those people that can live with it, then go hire a cheap attorney, not the cheapest.
Okay.
So we charge $8,500. You could do it in payments.
And with me, you representing me, that would guarantee that this doesn't go on my record?
Yes.
Okay, and the odds of me not going with you and going with the public defender, what do you think about that?
Roll the dice.
Is it okay for a paralegal or an attorney to offer a guarantee to a defendant?
That violates our professional code of conduct. That's 101. You do not guarantee outcomes.
Smith's case was one of the hundreds of cases the district attorney's office was forced to drop because the credibility of the officer involved was called into question.
I can't understand how a person can abuse their power that way.
The only way that the public is going to be able to trust this police department is if they see the officers held accountable and the lawyers involved held accountable.
Gabrielle Burkhart, KRQE Investigates.
So just how successful was that attorney's office at getting DWI defendants off the hook? News 13 waded through years of cases to find out, and the numbers are shocking. We'll show them to you next. An Albuquerque defense attorney able to just about guarantee his clients a win in court.
KRQE investigative reporter Ann Perret took a deep dive into the data, and the numbers tell their own story.
Charges dropped one after another, and the common denominator, attorney Thomas Clear III. All those cases feeling like a slap in the face to victims and advocates who have fought to hold drunk drivers accountable.
We were surprised when they didn't show up, but the phone call came in, I don't know, 11:30, 12 o'clock, something like that.
It's an experience countless New Mexicans share, their lives impacted by drunk driving.
Try to think of a worse scenario on Christmas Eve with 3 little girls and their parents had just gone up to 9 Mile Hill to look back at the lights and say, Merry Christmas,
this is what Jesus has given us.
For Kent Cravens, it doesn't feel like 30 years ago.
It was yesterday. It was yesterday.
The details of the night Gordon House sped 90 miles an hour in the wrong direction on I-40 in Bernalillo County and plowed into Craven's family head-on, killing his sister-in-law, 3 young nieces, and severely injuring his brother.
I will tell you that down to the minute, I remember it very well.
The crash changed the course of his life and shaped New Mexico's drinking and driving laws.
It became a real cry from the community to do something.
His brother's mother-in-law jumped right in. Nadine Milford's name became synonymous with DWI reform. She worked tirelessly with the legislature to shut down drive-through liquor stores and make a 4th DWI a felony. Cravens became a lawmaker, spending more than a decade in the state Senate. He's most proud of getting interlock devices in offenders' cars in the early 2000s.
It has been a long time, and it seems like we have taken a giant step backwards.
He's referring to the FBI's investigation into APD's DWI unit. Knowing the feds are zeroed in on at least one attorney, Thomas Clear III, our investigative team sifted through 6 years of his DWI court cases to find out how and why his clients' cases were dismissed. From 2018 through 2023, we found Attorney Clear's average dismissal rate was 63.3%.
We also looked at the number of cases Attorney Clear had with the 4 Albuquerque police officers whose credibility has been called into question tied to this federal investigation. Throughout the past 6 years, 25 of Clear's clients pulled over by Honorio Alba Jr. all had their cases dismissed. So did the 4 Harvey Johnson handled. 31 of the 36 Joshua Montano arrested saw dismissals, and 5 of 6 cases were dismissed with Nelson Ortiz as the arresting officer. Thomas Clear had a 91.5% dismissal rate with these 4 APD officers. So if one of them pulled you over and you hired Attorney Clear, the numbers say there's less than a 10% chance you would be held accountable for that DWI charge. How? We can only look at reasons for a dismissal. Court records show officers repeatedly weren't showing up to pretrial interviews and hearings, which often led to a case being dragged out too close to the 6-month time limit, leaving no other option than to dismiss. Court documents mention in some cases, Alba and Montano couldn't even show up on Zoom. Other reasons for Montano's 31 dismissals, a flat tire, and not handing over evidence. We stopped by Clear's law office, which the feds raided in January, to ask about his high dismissal rate and the federal investigation. While Clear answered our knocks, he refused to answer our questions.
No comment at any point, no phone calls or anything. Okay, thank you for your time.
They owe this community a lot for this behavior here. Go serve your time. I hope they get convicted. That's a crime. Dear God. Wow.
We brought our 6 years of data to Linda Atkinson, who's run the DWI Resource Center since the 90s. Her work involves presenting research-based solutions on how to curb New Mexico's drunk driving problem.
Disgusting, despicable. To me, it really comes down to the law keepers are the law breakers.
In those 6 years, the 4 APD officers pulled over a total of 71 people who then hired Clear, and a judge dismissed their case. We went through each one and shared with her 18 of them had previous DWI convictions, 10 faced new DWI charges after their case was dropped.
It all makes sense. It's just, I start getting so angry looking at this again and thinking 30 years back, easy. Yep, no change.
Atkinson says when guilty drunk drivers are let off the hook, there's no true deterrent, and that next time, they may not just be hurting themselves.
Pretty corrupt, huh? Yeah. Where's your faith in the system? I mean, where's anybody's faith in the system? And you talk to people who have lost loved ones.
That's the part that makes it hard for me, is it was a conscious decision to just spit in the face of everybody who's ever had a tragedy in their life. And there's thousands of families. And the stories, man, it's hard.
Ann Perrette, KRQE investigates.
The pattern of officers skipping out on court has drawn intense scrutiny in the weeks since the scandal broke, prompting a flurry of finger-pointing over whose job it is to track officer attendance.
If they didn't show up to court, we rely on being notified by the district attorney's office.
Not so, says the district attorney's office, who told News 13 they were not obligated to send a notice to APD when an officer missed court. The chief later countered it was not a formal arrangement.
As of this moment, no, we do not have agreements with any of the entities that we're working with. Never have had one. This is just the way the system's always worked.
Raising even more questions, Medina said in early February his team had just discovered that they hadn't received any missed court notices since September of 2022. That's nearly a year and a half, and somehow no one noticed.
We are working to figure out why we weren't getting as many notifications, or where our notifications are going. Now look at it. I'm not pointing fingers anywhere. We just don't know.
Medina said that's something the department is working with the DA's office to rectify. The issue prompted heated questions from city councilors, with the chief arguing that missed court might just be a small piece of the puzzle.
The first thing I'm going to just kind of mention is let's not get to assumptions that this federal investigation is related to missed courts. I think that's the first thing we all have to recognize. That
I did not ask that. I didn't say anything about a federal. I asked about missed courts.
President Lewis, Councilor Sanchez, I was just trying to make sure that we were aware of the fact that this could be bigger.
Still, no one, not the officers nor any attorney, has been charged with the crime, as the Fed's investigation remains under wraps. But the FBI did sit down with KRQE Investigates to talk about investigations like this. That's coming up after the break.
This is a KRQE News Special, Albuquerque Police DWI Dismissal Scandal.
We continue our KRQE News 13 special with a look at what we've learned about the scandal inside APD's DWI unit. So far, we've heard from the chief, witnesses, potential victims of the scheme, even an implicated officer. But the FBI, who's behind this investigation, still has not spoken publicly about it.
That's typical in federal cases, but Albuquerque's special agent in charge did sit down with KRQE investigative reporter Gabrielle Burkhart to talk about the ongoing battle against public corruption.
If you ask the FBI to talk about an open and active investigation,
ongoing investigations are just something we can't talk about.
That's the answer you'll usually get. But in the midst of a federal public corruption investigation we've learned involves accusations Albuquerque police officers were getting paid to get DWI cases dismissed, Albuquerque's FBI special agent in charge, Raul Bujanda, wants people to know this.
Why do you feel like it's important to address the public in this conversation?
My whole reason for being here is I want to make sure that you should have the confidence to be able to contact your local law enforcement. But more than that, you should have the confidence of reporting it to us, the FBI, and know that we will do something about it.
No one is facing any criminal charges yet.
But really kind of these hinge on someone doing the right thing, right? Someone being within those networks, someone being a victim to one of these crimes and coming forward and just reporting that, so that we can start to look at it, because these are very difficult investigations.
While Bujanda won't talk specifics, he acknowledges cases like this impact public trust in law enforcement.
When people see that, they feel that these are the people that were hired to protect us, and now I'm not even sure I even want to call them. And that's the last thing I want anyone to feel.
Public corruption cases can generally take years, he says, with investigative tactics shrouded in secrecy to ensure there's accountability.
It's possible that a public official could go to federal prison for committing a public corruption.
Almost definitely. Yes, that happens all the time.
While the FBI is known for tackling brazen crimes like bank robberies, terrorist threats, and kidnappings,
public corruption within the FBI has the highest priority. It's our highest priority when it comes to overall criminal threats. Not to say that it's more important or less important than other things, but to us, that type of violation is something that is just not tolerated or should be tolerated by those that we serve.
And in this case, Buhanda says the public should expect to hear about the FBI's conclusions soon.
We'll get a conclusion. We'll get to a conclusion soon. All those individuals that we see that are wearing the badge, that are supposed to do the right thing all of the time, that they are doing the right job for us. And if someone sees that that's not the case or has information that could be helpful for this or any other investigation, they need to come forward. They need to reach out to us.
Gabrielle Burkhart, KRQE Investigates.
At least one Albuquerque attorney we know of did come forward. Damon Eli, also a former state representative, has spent 35 years suing attorneys for bad behavior on the job. So when two people contacted him separately with similar stories about a scheme involving APD, he knew right away the FBI needed to know.
The day they came in, I let the FBI know. And I didn't contact APD because they obviously have a conflict. And I was really proud of these people coming forward because I think it takes real courage to do it.
Eli didn't give details about what he heard out of respect for the federal investigation. He also doesn't know whether his tips are what uncovered the corruption case.
Albuquerque's police chief says he opened his investigation more than a year ago after receiving tips claiming misconduct within the DWI unit. Last fall, he contacted the FBI, he says, only to learn they were already on the case. Chief Medina says he had hoped to keep the scheme under wraps until the feds were ready to go public, but says he had to start talking when word of this scandal got out.
I want everybody to hear this very clear. Chief Medina was never, ever gonna, ever threaten the ability for us to get to the bottom of this by announcing this to the public prior to my partners with the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office saying it is now time for us to go public.
Whether federal indictments against the officers are coming, we will have to wait and see.
In the meantime, KRQE investigative reporter Gabrielle Burkhart spoke with Chief Medina to see what happens on the department side.
One after another, those officers decided to give up their badge rather than be interviewed by Internal Affairs. I wanted to hear from the chief to hear if they were a part of the scheme. How will those officers still be held accountable?
You know, Gabriella, we can't force them to continue to stay here till we terminate them, but these individuals have immensely lost. There's some that are extremely close to retirement that are losing out.
The resignations started in early February, and all 5 of these officers resigned by late March. The officers' tenures ranging from 8 to 24 years with the department. Financially, the chief says the officers are losing out on paychecks and a full career with retirement benefits. The chief also filed misconduct reports with the State Law Enforcement Academy, which could affect those officers' law enforcement certification. Chief Medina says the 5 who resigned are likely following their attorney's advice by quitting before their IA interviews.
I think it looks horrible on the individual officer, and I think it looks bad and it makes them appear guilty. But I also know that an inconsistent statement or anything that they've told the FBI before could be a federal charge for lying to an FBI agent. So they have a lot at stake here coming back to us.
The chief named a member of his top brass, Commander Kyle Hartsock, to run the internal investigation. He says the public will hear the results when that investigation is complete.
We may never know just how many potential defendants never face prosecution because of the scheme.
But we do know the DA has dismissed hundreds of cases since this scandal broke, since those implicated officers were involved.
All I can tell you is that I have no choice.
Next, a look at some of the flagrant behavior going unpunished.
It makes me sick to my stomach, but that's what we have to do.
Bernalillo County District Attorney Sam Bregman calling it a gut punch as he is forced to dismiss more than 200 open cases, mostly for DWI.
That's because the cases were handled by the now former officers implicated in the scheme, whose names have now been added to what's known as the Giglio list, meaning their credibility is compromised.
I have no choice. My prosecutorial ethics require me to dismiss these cases.
Investigative reporter Gabrielle Burkhart shows us one of those cases.
I looked into some of the cases the DA was forced to drop, including this stop, a driver accused not only of DWI, but also cruising down Central with his car on fire. The man police say was clearly driving drunk that November night is now off the hook.
Albuquerque police lapel video from November 16th shows firefighters extinguishing the flames from a smoking SUV on Central near Wantabo.
Someone called saying they were trying to flash at him, trying to let him know his car's on fire.
It was just before midnight. As part of the investigation, DWI officers were called in. Police found the 23-year-old driver had an open container in the center console.
A second open container, same thing. Mostly full.
Officers say the driver had, quote, bloodshot, watery eyes, an odor of alcohol emanating from his face, and mumbled speech.
Where's your friend live? I don't really know. I was just trying to get them home safe.
But the driver didn't have anyone else in the car. Officers say the 23-year-old failed field sobriety tests and had a blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit, a .26 and a .25.
Help your friend get home? And where's this friend at?
I'm not sure.
He was arrested for DWI, and according to the criminal complaint filed 2 weeks after this arrest, police say the young driver was also driving on a revoked license, but this case won't be prosecuted.
He's so drunk right now, dude.
It's one of the hundreds of cases dropped, quote, in the interest of justice by the Bernalillo County District Attorney's Office in January. The officer who made this arrest resigned amid the federal probe.
Hey, how are you?
APD officer Honorio Alba. He was awarded the 2023 Mothers Against Drunk Driving Officer of the Year from New Mexico.
Was it just like some popped flames in the middle of the road type thing?
Yeah, like someone called saying.
In this case, there's no detention center booking sheet for the suspect that night. The officer wrote he was, quote, released from the prisoner transport center due to the prisoner transport center being shut down. Gabrielle Burkhart, KRQE Investigates.
That dropped case is just one example of the fallout since Alba and the other officers were named in connection to the investigation. Another defendant whose case the DA dismissed, Alexander Borson Pope. Court documents show he was passed out behind the wheel of a Jeep, then got physical with officers. That would have been his 5th DWI had he been convicted. Also facing a possible 5th conviction, Rayburn Apache. What earned him his 4th back in 2016 was crashing a stolen truck into 3 vehicles, including a police cruiser. APD warned us about him back then.
Somebody will end up getting killed because of this guy. He needs to stop getting behind a wheel, or he needs to be locked up, one or the other.
Also, Fernando Ornelas looking at a possible 8th DWI conviction and a decade in prison. His case, too, dismissed. Many questions still loom, like who else could be involved and how will the department make sure this never happens again?
We look to the future of the investigation and the Albuquerque Police Department after the break.
APD's DWI unit left in shambles after 5 of its officers resigned and the federal investigation continues.
Chief Medina says the unit may never look the same again. He explains the changes he has already made and what else could be coming to stop a scandal like this from ever happening again.
We recognize this is a complex investigation that started months ago. For the Albuquerque Police Department.
It's been more than a year since APD started investigating allegations of misconduct against officers in the DWI unit. Then in October, APD learned the FBI was also investigating. Now Chief Medina says he's already implemented some changes to ensure his DWI unit is operating by the book, like having an officer monitor court cases.
We've made one change with making sure that we have currently a lieutenant assigned to interface and communicate with Metro Court to immediately report any missed courts for the day from our DWI unit.
The investigation has also led to a personnel shakeup in the DWI unit. Chief Medina says he has taken measures to make sure everyone in the unit is on the up and up.
I've moved them to answer to field sergeants till we kind of see where everybody lands, but I understand they've all been spoken to and that there's been no allegations towards the remaining officers at this point.
But he has more plans to revamp the unit, including putting limits on how long officers can serve.
I'm actually working and looking at the idea of reorganizing the unit in a different way and putting a limitation on the amount of time that you can spend there. There's a lot of money for officers in DWI in court. They work with the same defense attorneys over and over again, and they could develop relationships. They work with the same prosecutors, and I'm going to need everybody to be working together to hold everybody accountable. And I think that it may be time that there's a limit placed in the amount of time that an officer spends in DWI.
At this hour, there's no way to know where the federal investigation into corruption inside the Albuquerque Police Department will lead or who might be charged in this case.
We do know the attorney implicated in the scheme has handled hundreds of cases with officers from across the metro, raising the question, could this scheme extend to other agencies?
The Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office and state police tell us there's no indication their employees are involved, though state police is conducting an audit.
In the meantime, News 13 will continue to follow every lead, dig through court files, and bring you every new detail of this story as we uncover it right here on air and online at krqe.com. Thanks for watching this KRQE News 13 special.